Hello, horror lovers. Welcome to the chilling world of Mr. Haunt. Please subscribe. It's our biggest motivation to keep bringing you spine-tingling stories. Let us know in the comments which city you're listening from. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit the like button. Now, let's get into the stories. One night something happened which I cannot forget, not because it scared me, but because it changed the way I view what we call wildlife. It happened in the fall of 2009, just outside a little logging town in Oregon called Durbin Hollow. I was 27 then, fresh out of a messy divorce, and had just started working with the Forestry Service as a backcountry fire scout. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me something I desperately needed. Solitude. There's a trail that forks off Garrison Creek near mile marker 118. It's not marked, not used, not even known to most locals unless they've lived there long enough. It winds around a sloped valley, choked with Douglas firs and moss, draped alders. I'd seen all kinds of wildlife there, black bears, bobcats, even a cougar once, but nothing prepared me for what I encountered that October. The day started normally. I packed my gear, grabbed my trail journal, and set out to check on a string of old fire towers slated for decommissioning. The hike in was quiet, birds chirping, crisp air, the earthy scent of damp leaves. I stopped around noon to eat and took notes on a small landslide I'd spotted along a ridge. All in all, routine stuff, but when I got to Tower 3, a crooked old, structured half, swallowed by vines, I noticed something off. Very off. The steps leading up to the observation deck had been snapped. Not weather worn, not rotted, snapped. Like someone had gripped them with enormous force and ripped them in half. I bent down to inspect the break and found something stranger. Hair black. Coarse, matted, like bear fur, but longer, and stuck between the slats. Still damp. I rubbed it between my fingers. It reeked, musty and sour, like wet dog and rot. I dropped it instinctively and stood up, suddenly aware of how silent the forest had become. No birds, no wind, even the ever-present drone of insects had stopped, and then I heard it, a low grunt, followed by the crunch of leaves. Something was watching me. I turned in slow, careful steps. At first I saw nothing but trees. Then movement. About 40 yards away, just behind a wide cedar, something big stepped out. It wasn't a bear. I knew bears. This thing stood upright, at least 8 feet tall, muscles thick as engine blocks, covered in blackish, brown hair, but with patches missing, exposing mottled, grayish skin underneath. Its face was wrong, not fully human, not fully ape. Flat nose, wide, set amber eyes, thick brow, and it was staring right at me. I didn't move. Neither did it. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but could have been 30 seconds. My heart pounded. My brain screamed run, but my legs stayed frozen. Then it sniffed the air, snorted loudly, and stepped back into the brush gone. Just like that, I booked it out of there. Didn't even gather my gear. I made it back to my truck in record time, locked the doors, and drove straight to the ranger station. When I told my supervisor, Dave, he looked at me for a long time, then said, "Tower 3. Yeah, we've had other reports out that way." I stared at him. Reports of what? He didn't answer, just handed me a folder. Inside were witness statements, going back decades, all the same pattern. Sightings of a large bipedal creature, always near Garrison Creek, always in late fall. Some had photos, blurry, grainy, but enough to get the idea. I thought this stuff was folklore, I said. Dave's expression didn't change. Folklore starts somewhere. I took 2 weeks off after that. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop thinking about the way it looked at me. Not aggressive, not scared, curious, but something bothered me even more. When I returned to retrieve my gear from Tower 3, I found everything: tent, pack, journal, neatly stacked beside the trail, like it had been placed there by something with hands. I haven't been back since. I left the Forestry Service a year later and moved east. I still hike, still camp, but I don't go off trail anymore. I don't wander too far from my vehicle, and I definitely don't go near Garrison Creek, because now I know there's something out there, and it doesn't want to be found, but it watches and waits. When I was 32, I made the worst decision of my life. I went back to Garrison Creek. 5 years had passed since that night. 5 years of restless sleep and endless questions. The memory had faded in some ways, but certain details, its eyes, the strange silence, the way my gear had been left for me, stayed with me, like splinters under the skin. I couldn't let it go. And then, one day, I got a call. It was from a woman named Jolene Owens, a wildlife biologist working for Oregon State. She'd gotten my name through a former coworker and said she was studying behavioral anomalies in black bear populations near Durbin Hollow. I laughed and told her, "If you're calling me about bears, you've got the wrong guy." But then she said, "I've read your witness report. I don't think it was a bear either." That got my attention. She wanted to return to Garrison Creek, and she wanted me to guide her. I should have said no. We drove up in late October, same time of year. Jolene brought along another guy, a tracker named Colin, ex-military, quiet, with a thick scar across his jaw and a walking stick made from blackthorn. He wasn't talkative, but when I mentioned Tower 3, his eyes tightened. "We've followed stories like this before," he said. "Alaska, Montana, even Pennsylvania. But Oregon's different. Something's older here, wiser." We camped just off the main service road, about 3 miles from the trailhead. The first day was quiet. Normal wildlife, normal weather. We made it to the overgrown fork and started our way toward Tower 3. But as soon as we reached the ridge above the creek, that silence hit again, dead and unnatural. It was back. We found the old fire tower partially collapsed, a heap of splintered beams and rusted metal. But what caught our attention were the tracks, massive, deep, and fresh. They were at least 16 inches long, bipedal, spaced far apart. No claw marks. Whatever made them walked upright. The moss was crushed, not torn. It had weight, control, and intent. Colin took photos while Jolene gathered tufts of hair snagged on a broken branch. Same dark color, same texture. She sealed them in a sample bag, her hands shaking slightly. That night, we camped just below the ridge, far enough from the tower but close enough to monitor the area. Around midnight, I woke to a strange sound, like someone pacing just outside. The ring of trees, then came a thud, heavy, like a rock dropped from a height. Then silence. In the morning, we found something chilling. A pile of stones, stacked neatly at the edge of camp, right outside the fire ring. On top of the pile was a small, carved piece of wood, smooth, weathered, in the shape of a face, not human. Long jaw, recessed eyes, wide nostrils. It hadn't been there the night before. We packed immediately. Colin wanted to stay and set up motion, activated cameras, but Jolene and I both felt something had shifted. This wasn't just a territory, it was a threshold, and we'd crossed it. On the hike back, we heard the calls. Deep, guttural howls, far too long and low to be wolves. One started on the left, then answered from the right. Something was flanking us, hurting us. I gripped my pack tighter and kept my eyes on the trail, refusing to look into the trees. We made it back to the truck by dusk. Jolene was pale and silent. Colin just muttered, "We got what we came for." But it didn't feel like a success. It felt like we'd been warned. 2 months later, I got a package in the mail. No return address, Inside were test results. The hair samples didn't match any known species in the DNA database. Not bear, not primate, nothing. But the analysis included a note scribbled in pen. Mitochondrial DNA appears human. Nuclear DNA, unreadable. This is not an error. There was a photo included of the carved wooden face. Underneath it, one word was written, Sentinel. Now I live in the desert, far from trees, far from rivers. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I wake up with the scent of moss in my nose and a memory of yellow eyes watching me from the dark. They say knowledge is power. I say knowledge is a curse. Because now I know what's out there. And it knows I know. And it hasn't forgotten. One night something happened which I cannot forget. Not because of fear, but because of the choice it forced me to make. 3 months after receiving the package with the DNA report and that carved wooden face, I was still trying to convince myself that it was over, that I could go back to normal life. But normal is a luxury you lose once you come face to face with something the world says doesn't exist. The nightmares came back, but now they weren't just memories. They were messages. In one dream, I saw the sentinel standing at the tree line, holding that carved wooden face in its hand. Then it spoke, not in words, but in something deeper. I felt it in my chest, like thunder underwater. Leave the forest be. I woke up drenched in sweat, the sound of heavy footsteps fading from my ears. 2 days later, I got a call. Jolene was missing. Colin called me, his voice tight. She went back, he said, alone. Didn't tell anyone. Thought she could gather more evidence. She's been missing for 4 days. I asked the obvious. Why the hell would she go back? His silence told me all I needed to know. Same reason I would have. She couldn't let it go either. I'm heading up there, he said. You in? My mouth said no. My gut said no. But I packed my gear anyway. We reached the trailhead by late afternoon. October again. Same air, same light. Colin had a different air about him this time. More armor, less wonder. He carried his sidearm in something else, a small pouch tied with leather. He noticed me staring and said, protection, folk stuff. We followed the old path to the ridge. Everything looked the same, but it felt worse. It was like the forest knew we were there, watching, waiting, as we neared the broken fire tower. We found Jolene's camp, abandoned. Her tent was torn, not shredded, just opened, like someone had unzipped it carefully with claws. Her notebook was still there, the last thing she wrote. It follows, but not to harm, to warn. That night, we made camp in silence. I felt exposed, small. The forest felt like it was breathing around us, pulling us in. I didn't want to sleep, but I must have dozed off, because at some point, I woke to the sound of soft crying. I thought it was Jolene. I got up, grabbed my flashlight, and followed the sound into the trees. But what I found wasn't her. It was that same carved wooden face, sitting at the base of a tree, a fresh one, newer, rougher, but unmistakably the same, and underneath it, her pendant. I felt something behind me. I turned, light shaking, and there it was again. The sentinel, taller than I remembered, covered in black, brown fur, but with more scars now. Its eyes weren't angry. They were tired. It held out a massive hand and pointed, not at me, but past me, toward the creek dot. Then it vanished into the dark, without a sound. Colin and I followed the direction the next morning, down into the creek bed, over the rocks, through the willows. Eventually, we found her. Jolene was alive, barely. She was curled up in a hollow beneath a stone outcrop, wrapped in furs that didn't belong to any animal I'd ever seen. She was feverish, dehydrated, muttering things we couldn't understand. We got her out of there, called in airlift support. She spent 3 weeks in a hospital, and when she came to, she only said one thing before breaking down in tears. It could have killed me. But it didn't. We never went back. Not me. Not Colin. And not Jolene. The Sentinel gave us a second chance. A warning. And now I live by one rule. If the forest gives you something back, you leave it alone. Some things don't want to be proven. Some things are only waiting for you to stop looking. And if you're lucky, they'll let you walk away. I was 34 when it happened to me. Again. I had promised myself I'd never go back. But promises made in fear don't last forever. Especially not when you feel like a part of you never really came back. It started with a letter, not an email, not a text. A handwritten stamped envelope, with no return address. Just my name and my old place in Missoula. I hadn't lived there in years, but it found me anyway. Inside was a single page, faded, yellowed, a map, hand-drawn. There was a black X not far from Garrison Creek, and underneath, 4 words scribbled hastily. It's waking them up. I stared at that message for hours. Every logical part of me said to burn it and forget, but logic is no match for obsession, especially when obsession wears the face of a woman you couldn't save. I hadn't seen Jolene since the hospital. After her release, she moved, cut off contact with Colin and me entirely. Colin said it was PTSD. I didn't believe that. I believed she knew something we didn't, something she couldn't say. So when I got that letter, I thought maybe it was from her, and if it was, then she needed help. I packed light. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even bring a gun this time. I brought the pendant she left behind, and the old wooden face from my shelf. It had been gathering dust. I wrapped them both in cloth and shoved them into my rucksack. This wasn't about proof anymore. It was about understanding. Or maybe just saying goodbye. The right way. The trail felt older, more narrow, like the forest had closed in since the last time. Trees leaned in too far. Shadows didn't move with the wind. I started seeing things, not creatures, carvings, all over the trunks of pine trees. Deep, crude symbols, circles inside, triangles, slashes in sets of 3, and more of those wooden faces, dozens of them, all different, some smiling, some screaming. Then, at dusk, I saw a shape in the distance, human-sized, not quite man, not quite beast. I froze. It didn't move. Then, I heard whispering, not out loud, inside my head, like a vibration or pressure behind my ears. A question that wasn't in English, but still made perfect sense. Why are you here? I couldn't speak. I held out the bundle from my pack and unwrapped it. The pendant, the face, and the whisper came again, this time like a breath of wind curling around my spine. Too late. Then the shape vanished. I made camp near a rocky clearing. No fire, just me and the stars. I didn't sleep. I couldn't, because the forest wasn't silent anymore. It breathed. It shifted all around me. I heard movements, crunches, low groans, like tree limbs warping. Twice, I heard a long, low howl. Not a wolf, not even close. It shook my chest. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in a year. Don't look at them. It was Jolene. I whipped around, and she was there. Dirty, gaunt, but alive. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. What are you doing here? I whispered. I came back a month ago, she said. Same letter, same map. I thought I could warn people, but I was wrong. She looked around us and stepped closer. They're waking up. What do you mean? I asked, pulling her into the moonlight. More than one, she said. The Sentinel. He wasn't alone. I think he was a guardian, like a barrier, and now he's gone. I felt a pit open in my stomach. You think he's gone? She nodded, then pointed toward the X on the map. They buried something there. Long ago, the people before settlers. A gate, maybe. The Sentinel kept it quiet, but someone disturbed it. Jolene handed me a torn field journal. I recognized Colin's handwriting. I came here with him, she said, but he didn't make it out. I scanned the last entry. The forest is hollow beneath the creek bed. I heard breathing below the rocks. If I don't come back, tell someone. Tell them we were wrong. It was never just one. My knees buckled. I sat on a cold stone. The sentinel wasn't protecting us from it. He was protecting it from us. We moved, at first light, following the map's route. About an hour in, we reached a spot where the trees thinned. Black rocks jutted from the ground like broken teeth. The air was still, but heavy. In the center was a sinkhole, deep, covered in dead vines. Jolene said nothing. She just walked forward, dropped her pendant into the hole, and whispered, "We didn't mean to wake you." Then we turned to leave. That's when the scream came, not from the trees, from below, like something impossibly huge and furious, locked away for centuries. The vines began to twist upward, and I saw a hand, gray, hairless, long fingers with claws, stretched toward the edge. We ran. We didn't stop until nightfall, and even now, I don't know what we left behind in that hole, but I know this. The sentinel was never the monster. He was the jailer, and now the prison is open. I haven't been back since. I never will. But some nights, when the moon is high and the air gets real still, I swear I can hear that voice again, deep, in the marrow of my bones. Too late. One morning I woke up with dried blood on my socks and no memory of how I got home. That was the moment I knew it wasn't over. Jolene and I had escaped the forest. We never spoke during the ride back. We just sat there, blank-eyed, covered in mud and silence, like two war vets who'd survived a battle no one else knew had ever happened. But whatever we'd disturbed back at the sinkhole, it had followed us. Not in a literal way. Not with claws or growls or broken branches behind us. It followed in dreams, in patterns, in dread. 3 days after we returned, I noticed something strange in my backyard. A pile of perfectly stacked stones, balanced in a spiral, in the exact center of my garden. I live alone. My gate is locked. On the 4th day, I heard breathing under my bed. Not snoring, not hissing, breathing, like something massive, trying to stay quiet. I didn't check. I just left the house and sat in my car until the sun rose. Then came the knock, not at the front door, at my bedroom window. 3 stories up, just one knock. Exactly at 3:33 a.m., Jolene called me in a panic the next morning. "They're not done with us," she said. "We interrupted something ancient, something that can't be unseen." "What are they?" I asked. There was a long pause. "The hollow ones." She told me she'd been reading through Colin's journal. Apparently, he'd found references to an older tribe that once lived deep in the mountain basin, long before the Flathead or Salish. The tribe had no written name, just symbols burned into bark and stone. Always in groups of 3, the legend spoke of beings they called those who were left behind. Not spirits, not animals, something in between, according to their myths. These creatures once ruled the forest, not in strength, but in presence. They absorbed light, swallowed memory. They emptied the minds of those who saw them, until they were just shells. Hence the name, Hollow Ones, and the Sentinel. He wasn't hunting them. He was trapping them, feeding them enough to stay dormant. But now, they were hungry, and we had taken away their keeper. On the 7th night, I broke. I drove back, to the edge of Garrison Creek, not into the forest. I didn't have the strength. I just stood at the old ranger station, staring at the tree line. Jolene met me there, hollow-eyed, silent. We didn't speak for a long time. Then she held out a box. Inside were Colin's final pages, written in pencil, smeared with water, probably rain, maybe tears. One entry stood out. "They don't come at you with claws. They crawl into your thoughts. They mimic the people you trust, and then they make you forget who you were before them." Jolene isn't Jolene anymore. I'm not me either. Only one of us is walking out. I looked up at Jolene. "What is this?" She didn't answer. Then I noticed her shadow. It wasn't cast in the direction of the sun. It leaned toward me. I stepped back. She stepped forward. "Jolene?" I asked. She tilted her head, almost curious, then spoke, but her voice came out like 3 overlapping whispers. "You're not hollow yet," she said, "but you will be." I ran. I didn't look. Back behind me, I could hear footsteps that weren't hers. Heavier, slower, like something ancient dragging itself through time. I drove until I couldn't keep my eyes open. I crashed at a motel 2 towns over, locked the door, bolted the windows. I didn't sleep. I couldn't, because I knew the truth now. The Sentinel wasn't just a guardian. He was a sacrifice. His job wasn't to kill the Hollow Ones. It was to contain them by being the bridge between our world and theirs. And now he was gone, so the bridge is us. I've moved 10 times since then, changed my name, burned the journals, disconnected from everything and everyone. But it doesn't matter, because I still see them, in reflections that don't match my movements, in strangers, whose faces linger too long in crowds, in dreams where I wake up beside a fire, deep in the woods, and someone is watching me with eyes that don't blink. And every time I look in the mirror now, I wonder if I'm still me, or if some part of me got left behind in that forest, trapped with them, feeding the Hollow Ones, piece by piece. I wasn't a believer, at least, not in the things that go bump in the woods. I grew up hunting and hiking in the Appalachian foothills, surrounded by people who swapped Bigfoot stories, like baseball cards. But I chalked those up to tall tales, local color to spice up a campfire night. My name is Emma Caldwell. I'm 32, a wildlife biologist by training, passionate about studying elusive creatures, wolves, bears, anything that challenges my skills. Last fall, I accepted a contract to help catalog and monitor wildlife in the Pisgah National Forest, a sprawling and rugged expanse where occasional Bigfoot sightings were whispered, usually dismissed. The forest had been my refuge since my divorce, a place to lose myself in data and nature. But that autumn, something about the forest felt different. On my 3rd night alone, at the remote field station near Linville, I heard it for the first time, a deep, rhythmic tapping, like giant knuckles rapping on hollow wood. The sound echoed through the timber, steady and deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The moon was a pale sliver behind fast-moving clouds. The forest was silent, too silent. Then the tapping stopped. For a moment, the world held its breath, and then came the whisper. It wasn't a word or a language I recognized, just a low, breathy murmur, barely audible over the rustling leaves. It felt like the forest was trying to speak or warn. I felt a chill race down my spine. Over the next days, the sounds persisted. At times, I'd catch movement from the corner of my eye, huge shapes slipping behind trees, too large and quick to be any bear or deer. One evening, I found huge footprints pressed into the damp earth, larger than any humans, with 5 broad toes and no claw marks. They led from the creek, past my cabin, and disappeared into the underbrush. I tried to stay calm. I rationalized it as a local prank or misidentified wildlife, but the unease grew. Late one night, while analyzing camera footage, I saw something chilling. A dark figure standing upright near one of the trail cams. It wasn't running or hiding. It just stood and stared. I called it the Watcher. As days passed, the Watcher's visits became more frequent. At times, I swore I could hear it breathing, deep, labored, almost human. I wasn't alone anymore. One morning, I woke to find my supplies disturbed, food torn open, notes scattered, my carefully laid traps destroyed. The Watcher was sending a message. The forest whispered warnings. and I wasn't sure if I wanted to listen. The next morning, the forest seemed indifferent to my growing dread, the sunlight filtering gently through amber leaves. But inside me, unease coiled tighter than ever. I decided to hike the trail where I'd found the giant footprints the night before. If I was going to understand what I was facing, I needed evidence. And the wilderness was my laboratory. The air was crisp, each breath sharp and clean, as I traced the prints deeper into the woods. The trail wound through a dense thicket, where towering oaks and maples locked their branches above, like cathedral arches. The ground was soft from recent rain, preserving every detail of the mysterious footsteps. They were enormous, at least twice the size of my hiking boots. The toe imprints were rounded and blunt, no sign of claws. Something large, something powerful, had walked this way. My heart thumped louder than the steady crunch of my boots. I followed the trail until it ended abruptly at a small clearing. The clearing was strange. Trees stood bent away, as if recoiling from some invisible force, and the air was colder here, even though the sun shone bright. I knelt to inspect the ground. Something had been dragged. A dark line marred the earth, leading toward a rocky outcrop where moss-covered stones formed a jagged barrier. I felt eyes on me, though no one was there. My skin prickled as a low, guttural hum thrummed through the clearing. It was vibrating in my chest, a sound not meant to be heard but felt. I forced myself to stand, shaking off the sensation. That's when I saw it, half hidden behind a thick cedar, watching me. The Watcher, its massive frame was silhouetted against the forest, fur shimmering faintly under the sun's weak rays. Its eyes locked onto mine, deep pools of amber that seemed to pierce through my soul. I couldn't move, frozen in place by a mixture of terror and awe. Then, the Watcher raised a massive hand, not in threat, but in farewell, and with an almost imperceptible shift, it melted back into the shadows. I stumbled backward, heart racing, mind spinning. Why was it here? What did it want? The forest wasn't just home to this creature, it was its domain, and somehow I had crossed a boundary meant never to be crossed. That night, sleep escaped me. Every creak, every snap of twig was magnified. When I thought I heard the whisper again, I pressed my hands over my ears, begging silence. But the whisper wasn't a voice, it was a warning. The following morning, my nerves were raw, but I was determined. I couldn't just walk away, not now. I had come too far. I packed my gear and decided to venture farther into the forest, hoping to find answers, or at least some clue about what I had encountered. The trees thickened as I pushed beyond the clearing. The undergrowth was dense, ferns and brambles clawing at my pants with every step. The path was less distinct, broken only by faint animal tracks and the occasional enormous footprint that still seemed to pulse in the earth. The deeper I went, the heavier the atmosphere became, like the forest was watching and waiting. Around midday, I stumbled upon something I never expected, a rudimentary shelter, half collapsed and hidden beneath a massive fallen tree. Nearby were symbols, carved deep into the bark and stone, angular and jagged. They weren't natural scratches, but deliberate markings, ancient and worn by time. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Then I heard a sound behind me, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. I spun, heart pounding, to see the Watcher again. This time, it wasn't hidden. It stepped into the clearing fully, towering over me, every inch of it covered in dark fur, muscles rippling beneath the surface. Its eyes were tired, ancient, and yet filled with something almost human. I didn't run. I couldn't. The creature lifted its massive hand slowly, revealing a broken branch wrapped in what looked like strips of bark and feathers. It pointed toward the shelter. I hesitated, but stepped forward, my mind racing. Inside, I found remnants, bones, crude tools, and a tattered journal, half buried in dirt and leaves. I carefully opened it, brushing off decades of dust. The pages were yellowed, filled with shaky handwriting in a language I couldn't understand, interspersed with detailed drawings of a tall, hairy figure, much like the Watcher, alongside human figures, some peaceful, some violent. A sudden realization crashed over me. This was a record of interaction, maybe even coexistence, between humans and this creature, or its kind. But something had shattered that balance. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the trees, a branch breaking under heavy weight. The Watcher's eyes narrowed. It gave one last look, almost mournful, then vanished into the forest shadows. I sat alone in the clearing, clutching the journal, knowing my life had changed forever. The forest whispered, and now I understood why. I didn't move for hours. The journal sat in my lap, open to a page with a sketch I couldn't stop staring at. A human figure, kneeling, arms outstretched. Before them stood the same towering form with hollow eyes and tree, thick limbs. But around them, fire, destruction, and something darker crawling in from the edges of the page. It wasn't just Bigfoot. There was something else. That night back at the field cabin, I locked every window and door. The forest was no longer a place of wonder. It was a breathing thing, old and bruised, and I'd touched something in it that should have been left alone. I tried contacting the station supervisor via satellite phone. No signal. My radio crackled with static. Even the emergency GPS beacon, always reliable, blinked red. I was completely cut off. I should have panicked. I didn't. Something deeper than fear had taken root. Resignation maybe, or a strange clarity. The same kind of mental stillness that settles in when a predator is close and every cell in your body decides not to move. Just after midnight, I woke up sweating, my breath caught in my throat. The whispers were back, but this time, inside the cabin. They curled through the air like fog. Not speech, not sound, just presence. Then the front door creaked open, slowly, not broken, not forced, opened. The air grew heavier. My limbs screamed to move, to run, but my body wouldn't listen. From the doorway stepped a figure, not the Watcher. This one was smaller, more human. Its face was half covered in bark, fused with twisted roots like something grown from the earth. Where its eyes should have been, black pits stared at me. I couldn't scream. I couldn't look away. It tilted its head, studying me. Its mouth opened, revealing nothing inside, just darkness, impossibly deep. Then it spoke, but not aloud, not in words, in feeling. You saw him. You woke the memory. The voice cracked through my mind like ice splitting underfoot. I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears, but the voice kept coming. He was once guardian. Now he is hunted. Now he is prey. As are you. Then it stepped back, turned, and walked into the woods. I crawled to the door, trembling, just in time to see it vanish behind the tree line. I was no longer a visitor. I was part of whatever ancient war was still playing out in the heart of these woods, and it had only just begun. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The cabin was suffocating. No longer a shelter, but a box, too thin to keep whatever was out there from pressing in. I sat with the journal on my lap, flipping through pages I couldn't read, hoping for sense, for answers. But every page brought more dread. One drawing caught my eye, a circle of stones, arranged in a spiral, and at the center, a figure, arms outstretched, eyes glowing. The text beside it was faded, but one word stood out, scrawled in English: offering. The next morning, I hiked back toward the old shelter to see if I'd missed anything. The forest felt warped. Trails that had been clear were now snarled with roots. Landmarks I'd memorized, an unusual birch, a boulder shaped like a tooth, were gone at some point. I realized I was walking in circles. I stopped, turned, and found myself face to face with the Watcher again. Only this time, it wasn't alone. There were 3 others. just shapes at the edge of visibility. Massive, breathing, watching, and behind them, the forest. Watching too. I lowered my pack and knelt. Not out of fear, out of instinct. The watcher stepped forward and placed something at my feet. A bone. Long, yellowed, not animal. Human. Then, in one slow movement, it raised a massive arm and pointed east, deeper into the forest, beyond anywhere I had mapped or explored. It wanted me to go there, and for some reason I couldn't explain, I obeyed. I walked for hours. No compass, no GPS, only the invisible pull of that unspoken direction. By late afternoon, I reached the spiral, a perfect circle of flat stones, spiraling inward to a center marked with a jagged totem, wood, bone, and rusted metal. It hummed, not sound, but vibration, like the thing in the clearing was alive, or awake. I felt drawn toward it. When I stepped inside the spiral, the air changed heavier, older, and then the whispers returned, so loud, I dropped to my knees. My vision blurred. The trees swam in my periphery, and I saw, not with my eyes, but with something deeper. Visions flashed across my mind. Fire in the canopy. Men with guns and torches. Giant figures dragging their dead into caves. Screams, roars, and then silence. Not peace, suppression. I saw the watcher, young, proud, protecting a boundary, and I saw the figure from my cabin, the bark-faced thing, its mouth a well of nothing, guiding men into forbidden places, breaking something ancient, unleashing something. Worse that, the forest didn't belong to just one presence. It was a battlefield, and I had walked into the crossfire. I came to some time after nightfall, lying on the cold earth at the center of the spiral. The forest was so quiet, it felt like the entire world had been sealed shut. But I could hear something, faint, beneath the stillness. Breathing, not mine, something low, steady, massive. I rose to my feet slowly, bones aching, limbs stiff, head pounding like I'd been dropped from the sky. The spiral was glowing faintly now, dim green veins of moss or fungus tracing the stones like nerves. And across from me, just beyond the final curve of the spiral, something waited. It was not the watcher, it was something else. It stood taller than any of the figures I'd seen, but it didn't move, didn't breathe the way the others did. Its body was twisted and bark covered, like a dead tree pulled from the ground and bent into the shape of a man. Its face was blank. No features except a deep, vertical split where its mouth should be. It didn't blink, it didn't look at me, and yet, I felt its attention like a spotlight on my soul. Then the whispers returned, a hurricane of words not spoken, but injected into my mind. You walked into sacred ground. You broke the quiet. Now you choose. The spiral flared briefly with light. From the trees emerged the watcher, alone. It walked into the edge of the spiral and stopped. The entity, the bark-faced one, tilted its head in my chest. Something cracked open. I understood. This was a choice, not of life and death, but of allegiance. The watcher was once protector of this place, of balance, of the boundary between man and forest. But something, the being standing before me, had corrupted the order. It didn't feed on flesh. It fed on breach, on memory, on fear, and now it wanted me to replace the watcher. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. I looked at the creature, at the watcher, and I realized the watcher wasn't hunting me. It was trying to protect me, but its time was ending, and mine was beginning. The spiral blazed around me, a ring of fireless light. Then everything went dark. I woke up at the edge of the trail the next morning. The forest behind me dense and quiet. The spiral was gone. So was the journal. The trail markers had returned, and so had the sound of birds. I limped back to my truck, barely remembering the drive home. But something inside me had changed. The whispers are still with me, especially at night. Sometimes when I walk in the woods near my home, the trees seem to lean a little closer. They know me now, because I didn't leave that forest alone. Something came back with me. Something watching, waiting, and every night before sleep, I see its silhouette outside my window. Tall, still, and patient, and I whisper to it like it once whispered to me. I haven't forgotten. If you've never heard of Mira Valley, you're not alone. It's not on most maps anymore, and that's not an accident. It's one of those places that small towns don't talk about, not because of shame, but fear. Ask any local over the age of 50, and you'll get the same response. Don't go up that way. There's nothing there anymore. They're lying. There's something there, and I saw it with my own eyes. My name is Kate Abner. In 2022, I was researching historic mining settlements in northern Montana for a regional history book. I'd already written 3 pieces on ghost towns across Idaho and Wyoming, always staying rooted in facts, census data, architecture, and family records. I prided myself on staying away from superstition, but Mira Valley broke me. I found mention of it in an old county deed registry. Just a few lines about Valley District 7. Mining terminated 1949. Settlement evacuated. No explanation. I tracked down more. A crumbling newspaper clipping from 1950 talking about a missing federal crew, and a one-line note about geological instability. That was it. I should have taken the hint. Instead, I went there. The turnoff was just past a road called Cutter's Hollow. Nothing but a gravel trail swallowed by trees. I drove for nearly 40 minutes before the forest opened into a clearing. Wild and overgrown, the remnants of cabins buried beneath brush and moss. Nature had taken the place back, but it hadn't erased it. Not completely. I set up camp beside what used to be a general store. Its frame collapsed. The old signage rotted to near nothing. My plan was to stay 3 days. Take photos, collect samples, document structures. The first night was uneventful, almost peaceful, but then came the second. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of splashing, a rhythmic slosh, like something heavy, moving upstream. My tent was only 50 yards from a narrow creek that ran through the valley's edge. At first, I thought it was a deer, then it laughed. Not a full chuckle. Just one sharp exhalation, like someone surprised. A human sound, but it was wrong. I froze, still inside the sleeping bag. It laughed again. Then it said something. "Come here, girl." The voice sounded like my father. My father had been dead since 2016. I stayed inside the tent until sunrise, knife in hand, blood pounding in my ears. When I finally dared step outside, the morning mist was thick. The creek was calm, undisturbed, but beside it, I found tracks, barefoot, broad, and deep, at least 18 inches long. The toes splayed, more like a gorilla's, but the stride was human, long, straight, purposeful. I told myself I was sleep deprived, delusional. I started packing up. Then I found my recorder. It was lying 5 feet from the creek. Still running. I hadn't brought it out there. I played it back. Water sounds, then footsteps, then my voice, whispering, only it wasn't me. Not really, it sounded like me, but the words were off. Pretty place, Kate. Pretty girl, pretty skin, the voice used. My name. I didn't wait. I grabbed everything I could and started driving down that gravel road, shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. But the forest shifted. I should have come out near the highway in under an hour. Instead, I drove for 7. No matter which direction I turned, the forest looped. The sun spun too fast, then too slow. My GPS was static. My watch reset itself 3 times. Every so often, I'd pass the same clearing with a rusted bicycle, or the same blackbird, frozen in the same tree. And all the while, I kept hearing my own voice whispering through the static of the car radio, mocking, taunting, repeating the phrase, "Come here, girl." I eventually abandoned the car and walked. No gear, no sense of time, only that I had to keep away from the creek. Its sound echoed through the trees, too loud for its size, like it was chasing me. At some point, the trees parted. I collapsed in a roadside ditch as headlights hit my face. A logging truck driver found me 6 miles east of the valley, barefoot and shaking. He thought I'd been in an accident. I didn't argue. Back in civilization, nothing made sense. My car was found weeks later, in pristine condition, parked at a ranger station 60 miles south. My camera had no photos. The recorder had been wiped. Only one file remained, 5 seconds long. It was me, breathing then whispering, "He's still in the creek." I never went back, but I can't stop seeing him in my dreams. The tall figure at the water's edge, watching, mimicking, not a ghost, not a man, something that used to be both. It's why Mira Valley was abandoned, why it doesn't appear on maps, and why, even now, late at night, when I turn on the tap, I sometimes hear him breathing through the water. I wasn't supposed to be there. The lake was closed to the public after a rock slide blocked the only safe access road, but I was desperate. It was late July, and I'd just lost my job, my apartment, and my boyfriend. 3 hits in 2 weeks. So I drove through the night to Lake Ojala, Montana. My uncle used to take me there when I was a kid. It was a private place, sacred, quiet, but I didn't remember it feeling so empty. My name is Kara Fields, and I'm alive only because I stopped looking for answers and started listening to fear. The first day was uneventful. I parked at the ranger gate, hiked in, and made camp near the north shore. The lake was glassy, untouched, but the deeper the sun sank, the more I noticed the silence. No frogs, no birds, not even the bugs were singing. Just water lapping and wind shifting through dying pine needles. That night, I woke up to splashing. Something large was in the lake. Not swimming, waiting. I sat up in my tent, heart hammering. It was pitch black outside, but the moon lit the surface of the water just enough. I saw a silhouette moving near the reeds, tall, sloped shoulders, and arms, dragging along the waterline. It wasn't fishing. It was searching. I zipped the tent shut and held my breath until morning. When I stepped outside, I found wet footprints, long, wide, deep, leading up the bank from the water straight to where I'd pitched my tent. And then they just stopped. "No," returned Prince. No sign of struggle. It had come up, stood there, watching, then walked back into the lake backward. I packed up to leave, but when I turned on my phone, there was no service, and my GPS had been wiped. Not disabled, wiped. No maps, no logs. Just a single image in my camera roll I never took. A photo of me, asleep, in my tent. From outside, I ran the trail backward, hoping to find the logging road. I never did. Instead, I found the cabin. It wasn't on any of the maps. Small, sun-bleached, half-collapsed. I went in, hoping for a signal. What I found were the journals. 3 notebooks, moldy, warped, filled, with pages written by different hands across decades, all describing the same thing, a creature in the lake. Some called it the shoreman. Others said it was just a Bigfoot that had adapted, become amphibious. Every few years, someone came here and never left. And those who escaped weren't the same. The last entry was written in 2014. It watches from the shallows. It waits. It learns. Last night it repeated my mother's voice. The night before, it stood behind me while I looked in the mirror. The water is not deep enough to hide it, but it never truly surfaces. Only watches. I think I'm the last. I stayed one more night. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof. Maybe I wanted it to come close. It did. I sat by the water at dusk, flashlight off, camera ready. And when it rose from the water, my breath caught in my throat. Its body was slick with algae and moss. One arm was longer than the other. Its head was too narrow. But the worst part was the necklace it wore. A string of objects hanging from its chest, a plastic whistle, a metal key, a faded child's shoe, and a human jawbone. I fled. I don't remember how I found the road, or who drove me to the hospital. I told them I got lost, hit my head. They believed me. They always believe the easy story, but I can't sleep near water anymore. I don't shower after dark, and every time I open my phone, I check the camera roll, because that creature knew how to use it once, and I think it remembers me. I was 26 when it happened to me. I'd taken a seasonal ranger job in central Washington, near the eastern edge of the Cascades. I was grateful to have work again after a rough stretch, and the solitude of the forest seemed like a decent way to reset my life. No phones, no traffic, just wind, trees, and the calls of elk across the valleys. But I didn't expect what I found, or rather, what found me, on Ridgefire Trail. It started as whispers over the radio, not voices, but static that rose and fell like breathing. Sometimes it would spike sharply, then vanish for hours. I told myself it was just signal interference. Nothing strange about faulty equipment in the backcountry. But then came the screaming. My outpost was a small fire tower overlooking the northwest quadrant of the park. At night, you could see for miles, pitch black forests broken only by moonlight and the occasional flicker of lightning over distant peaks. One night, while logging wind patterns at around 2:30 a.m., I heard what sounded like a woman yelling. Not just yelling, wailing, like something was tearing her apart. I scanned the treetops with binoculars and saw nothing. I grabbed my flashlight, pointed it down the ridge, and froze. There were 3 elk, standing perfectly still, eyes fixed in the same direction. I turned to follow their gaze, and that's when I saw it. It moved like a man but too quickly, towering, covered in thick black hair. It weaved between trees with almost no sound, but each step made the undergrowth bend like it weighed 500 pounds. Then it vanished into the brush. I tried to convince myself I was hallucinating. I hadn't slept in 2 days. Maybe it was a bear, but something in my gut knew it wasn't. I logged the encounter and tried to sleep. The next day, I hiked the trail, alone. What I found disturbed me. There were branches, thick, healthy branches, twisted clean off trees, 8 to 10 feet above the ground. Hair clung to the bark, not bear hair, coarse and dark, like old rope. Then I found the tree. It had been stripped of bark in long clawed gouges, not gnawed like by a porcupine or clawed like a cougar. Torn and near the base of the tree, half buried in pine needles, was a single boot, a ranger boot. Size 11. I wear a size 10.5. I didn't lose mine. No other rangers were posted within 30 miles. I radioed base, asked if anyone had gone missing. They told me no. They said to stop imagining things. That night, the screaming returned, but this time, it wasn't distant. It was below the tower. I kept the lights off and looked out the window with night vision. Binoculars. The forest was still, deathly still. Not a single bird, not a single cricket. Then, from the darkness, I saw it again. standing just past the tree line. It stood completely still, like a statue. Then it let out a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a moan, like something mourning. Then it looked up right at me. I hit the radio in a panic. No response. Static again. Then came the whistle, not from the radio, from outside. It mimicked the chirp rangers used to signal each other. Two short, one long. I didn't respond. It did it again, and then it climbed the tower. I could hear the wood creak beneath its weight. Slow, deliberate steps, no rush. It wanted me to hear. Halfway up, I did the only thing I could think of. I fired a flare straight down. It struck something mid-air. There was a sound, half scream, half roar, and the thing dropped out of view. I never heard it hit the ground. By morning, there were no signs it had been there. No prints, no hair, just scorch marks where the flare had landed. The rangers that came up later said I must have had a bear scare. They made jokes, but they didn't look me in the eye when I told them about the whistle. I quit the job 2 weeks later, didn't give notice, just hiked out one morning and never went back. Sometimes, at night, I still hear that signal. Two short, one long. On my phone, on the wind, and sometimes, if I'm in the wrong stretch of woods, I see those same elk again, standing too. Still, watching, waiting. My name is Rosa Delaney, and I grew up in northern Oregon, surrounded by legends, trails, and thick, unforgiving woods. My parents owned a small gear shop in Sisters, a mountain town mostly visited by weekend warriors and lost souls looking for peace in nature. I wasn't the former, and I never found the latter. The summer after I turned 23, I took a solo hike on Blackstone Trail, a path closed since the early 90s due to repeated rock slides and a reputation for disappearing hikers, but it wasn't forbidden, just forgotten. Locals whispered about it like it had teeth. I thought it was romantic, in that reckless, young way. I'd take my sketchbook, camp for 2 nights, and draw until my hand cramped. My dad said the last person to go up there had never come back. My mom didn't speak to me the morning I left. The hike up was beautiful, overgrown, but still walkable. I saw signs of wildlife, hoof prints, scat, the occasional snapped branch. By the time I reached an old ranger outpost around dusk, my legs ached and my lungs burned. I set up camp beside the dilapidated shack, cooked a can of chili, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets and wind. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up, every hair on my body standing straight. I thought I heard whispering, but not the kind you can blame on wind or imagination. This was language, not English. Not anything I recognized. I unzipped the tent and stared into the dark. At first, I saw nothing. Then, to my right, just beyond the tree line, something moved. Huge, upright, silent. It passed behind a tree with shocking speed, too fast for its size. I couldn't breathe. The whispers stopped. I told myself I imagined it. Maybe my dream had bled into waking. I zipped the tent and didn't sleep again that night. The next day, my sketches were ruined. Not torn, redrawn. My pencil drawings, sketched with my own hands, had been altered. Figures added in the margins. Long-limbed creatures, crouching behind trees. One of them looked directly at the viewer. Its eyes, hollow circles, unblinking. I was done. I packed my gear and began the descent. But the trail had changed. What was a clear path the day before was now strangled by roots and briars. My trail markers, bright orange cloths I tied to branches, were gone. All of them. I was walking in circles. I know because I kept finding the outpost again. 3 times by late afternoon, I heard the whispers again, closer, urgent, angry. That night, I didn't camp. I climbed a tree and sat in the crook of two branches, gripping my knife. The forest moved beneath me. Something large walked through the underbrush without making a sound. Once, it stopped right beneath my tree and stayed for 10 minutes, breathing. When the sun rose, I found the path again. It hadn't been gone. I ran the last 2 miles. I didn't stop until I saw pavement. When I got back to town, I burned my sketchbook. 3 weeks later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a single page from my sketchbook, the one with the creature staring out. Someone had circled its eye, and beneath it, written in block letters, "We see you, Rosa." When I was 24, I took a job no one else wanted. It paid cash, was off the books, and involved hiking remote trails in northern Washington to update survey markers that hadn't been touched in decades. It sounded simple. It wasn't. I'd been backpacking solo for years, knew how to navigate without GPS, and figured it'd be easy money. A week's worth of hiking, logging coordinates, snapping a few photos. That's all they said. But they didn't tell me the trail was abandoned for a reason. They didn't tell me it passed through Hollow Ridge, a stretch of wilderness the local tribes refused to enter, even centuries ago. And they sure as hell didn't tell me that something was still living out there, watching anyone foolish enough to cross its land. It started on day 2. I was about 8 miles into the forest, deep in the backcountry. There was no cell signal. No wildlife sounds, just a blanket of silence that made the air feel heavy. That's when I found the first marker, bent sideways like something huge had slammed into it. The post was snapped clean in half, 10 feet, up the tree. That kind of damage doesn't happen from storms or age. Something had lifted it. I should have turned around. Instead, I logged the coordinates and kept going. An hour later, I found the tracks. Not boot prints, not paw prints. They were barefoot, enormous, maybe 16 inches long, and dug deep into the mud, as if something weighing half a ton had passed through. Whatever it was, it had only 4 toes, and its stride was unnaturally wide. I measured the distance between steps, nearly 5 feet. That night, I made camp by an old ranger station. The roof had collapsed years ago, and the walls were covered in black moss. As I drifted off to sleep, I heard movement, branches cracking in a slow, deliberate pattern around my tent. Clockwise, I stayed silent, clutching my knife, and then came the whistle, high-pitched, almost human, but off, like someone trying to mimic a bird, but not knowing how it really sounds. When I finally gathered the courage to unzip the tent, there was nothing there, except a massive handprint pressed into the mud beside my fire pit. Fingers the size of sausages, a thumb that was wrongly placed, almost too high up. And a smell. God, that smell, like rotting meat and wet fur. The next day, I radioed the base, static. I climbed the ridge to higher ground, still static. That's when I heard it. Far off in the trees, behind me. 3 knocks. Heavy, deliberate, spaced out. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't answer. I'd read stories. People who knock back tend to disappear. I kept moving. The trail faded fast. Every few hundred feet, I'd see more of those broken markers, sometimes torn clean out of the ground. One had claw marks across the metal, 4 parallel, grooves deep enough to bend steel. I slept with a fire that night, and that's when I saw its eyes. Across the clearing, maybe 30 feet out, behind the trees, 2 amber orbs, UNMOVING. Too high off the ground to be a deer or bear, I yelled. The eyes didn't blink, didn't flinch, just watched. When I threw a flare in that direction, it was gone, but the smell remained. That was the last night I slept. On the 5th day, I came across a cave, not marked on any map, Its entrance was half hidden by vines and boulders, but the smell gave it away. Stronger than anything I'd experienced. I should have turned back, but I was desperate, hungry, sleep deprived, so I went in. Inside I found bones, piles of them, elk, deer, even what looked like bear remains, and in the corner, a pile of clothes, human clothes, a tattered hiking boot with the heel chewed off, a shredded backpack covered in dried blood, and a camera. It still had power. When I checked the photos, my blood ran cold. They showed me, from behind, walking the trail, sitting by the fire, sleeping in my tent. I never took them. I ran. Didn't stop for food or rest. Just ran. I don't remember how I got back to the logging road. Don't remember flagging down the passing truck. But I remember what I saw as we pulled away. Something standing at the tree line. Broad shoulders, covered in dark, matted hair, arms hanging longer than its knees, watching me leave. Its eyes didn't show fear, just understanding, like it had let me go. This time, I quit that job, moved to Arizona, never hiked again. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear that whistle, soft and off-pitch, carried in on the wind through the desert, like it's reminding me I walked its trail. I saw too much, and next time, it won't let me leave. I was 26 when it happened to me, too old to believe in monsters, too young to know how wrong I was. That summer, I was hired by a small forestry consulting firm to do survey work in the Washington Cascades. My job was straightforward. Spend 3 weeks mapping old growth near Burnt Ridge, a remote stretch of wilderness known for its steep terrain and minimal foot traffic. I loved that kind of solitude, until I realized I wasn't alone. The ridge itself was accessible only by an overgrown logging road that hadn't seen use in decades. I parked my truck at the trailhead and hiked in with my gear, GPS, measuring tools, camera, tent, and a sat phone that barely held a signal on its best day. The forest was gorgeous. Towering pines, moss, choked clearings, and fog that clung to the treetops like a blanket of ghosts. I remember thinking, this is the kind of quiet that people dream about. But the deeper I hiked, the more unnatural that silence began to feel. By the third day, I realized something was missing. Birdsong. No crows, no hawks, not even bugs, just the sound of my boots, my breath, and the whisper of wind through old branches. On the fourth night, I was woken by something outside my tent. It wasn't loud, just heavy, slow crunching footfalls, circling. I sat up, heart hammering. My headlamp was on in seconds. I unzipped the tent and shined the light outward. Nothing but the steps stopped when I did. Whatever it was listening to me. I waited until dawn before stepping out. Around my tent were prints, barefoot, 4-toed, each one nearly twice the length of mine. I convinced myself it was a prank, some old timer in the woods trying to scare off outsiders. But the nearest community was 30 miles away. I tried to brush it off and pushed deeper into the woods. That afternoon, I found something strange near the north end of the ridge, a grove of snapped trees. They weren't cut, they were twisted, spiraled like wet celery stalks. Something impossibly strong had bent them sideways, some as thick as telephone poles. Worse, in the dirt beneath the trees, I found bones, dozens of them. Mostly animal, I think, but not all. That night I didn't sleep. Something was out there, watching. I could feel it in my bones. Some primal warning screaming in my gut. Around midnight, the smell hit me. Wet dog, mud, copper. It was close. I held my breath. I didn't dare move. Then I heard it exhale, right behind the tent wall. I didn't move, didn't blink. didn't breathe. The shape cast by my headlamp against the tent wall was massive, taller than a man, hunched forward, shoulders like a bison, long arms that ended too low. It stood there, silent. Then it growled, not like a bear, not like any animal I'd ever heard. It was almost spoken, a low guttural sound that rattled the tent poles, and then it was gone. At first light, I ran. I packed nothing. I left my gear behind, my compass, my sat phone, everything. I just followed the slope, praying I'd find the road before whatever that was decided to follow. Somewhere on the descent, I fell, snapped my wrist on a rock, and slid 30 feet down. A ridge face. When I stood up, it was there at the top, watching. Its face wasn't like a gorilla or a bear. It was flatter, almost human. But its eyes were wrong, small and deep, like coal in snow, and it smiled, not out of kindness, but out of understanding. It knew I was afraid, and it liked it. I made it to the road, hours later, barely conscious, covered in cuts and pine needles, limping like a man twice my age. A rescue crew found me that night, after I managed to trigger my emergency beacon. Luckily, one of the only things I'd remembered to grab. When they asked what happened, I told them I got lost, injured, disoriented. I never mentioned the creature, because they wouldn't believe me. I wouldn't believe me, but I know what I saw, and I'll never forget those eyes. Weeks later, when a team returned to retrieve my gear, they found the tent shredded. No claw marks, just ripped down the seams and folded neatly, like it had been packed by hand. Nothing else was recovered. Not my camera, not my sat phone, not my tools. Just one thing, a snapped branch, placed upright in the dirt next to my old fire pit, and hanging from the top of it, tied with my own bootlace, was my compass. The needle spun in circles. Burnt Ridge isn't on many maps these days, but if you find it, and something finds you, you'll wish it had stayed lost. One night something happened which I cannot forget, no matter how many times I've tried to push it away. I was 31 when I agreed to spend a week alone in my cousin's off-grid hunting cabin in northwestern Montana, near the edge of Broken Ridge Wilderness. He needed someone to check on it, patch the roof, and stock the supplies before the winter freeze. I needed a break from my job and some quiet. I thought it was a win-win. Looking back now, I wish I'd never gone, because there's something in those woods, something ancient, something that walks on two legs, watches from the trees, and remembers your face long after you've gone. It took nearly 7 hours to drive up there from Missoula, the last 2, on winding gravel roads that hadn't seen maintenance in years. My cousin Tim had left me a topo map, a list of GPS coordinates, and a warning, stay off the West Ridge Trail. Seriously, don't even look in that direction after dark. He laughed when he said it, but there was something in his eyes, something tight, cautious. I laughed it off. I'd grown up around mountains, heard all the campfire tales about wild men, skinwalkers, shadow things. Never saw a damn one. The cabin itself was old but sturdy. One main room with a wood stove, cat, and a tiny kitchen. No electricity, no signal, no neighbors for at least 10 miles. Just dense forest and silence so thick you could hear your own heartbeat. The first 2 days were uneventful. I fixed the leaky roof, hauled firewood, and hiked short trails behind the cabin. Everything was quiet, almost too quiet. No birdsong, no animal sounds, just wind in the pines. On the 3rd night, it began. I was sitting on the porch with a flashlight and a cheap paperback when I heard the knock. 3 slow, heavy knocks, not from the cabin door, from the woods. Far off, maybe 60-70 yards. I froze. The knocking didn't repeat, but something felt off. I went inside, locked the door, and sat there for over an hour. Listening. Nothing, just the creaking of the old cabin wood and my own nerves. I told myself it was a falling branch, maybe an echo. But that night, I had a dream. In it, I was walking barefoot through pine needles. I could smell sap and blood, and something huge was walking behind me, breathing slow, almost curious. I woke up drenched in sweat. The air smelled strange, wet, fur and rotted leaves, and the front door, which I had locked, was wide open. On the fourth day, I decided to leave early. I packed my things, checked the map, and set off down the trail toward my truck. But after walking nearly an hour, something didn't feel right. I passed a downed tree I swore I'd seen already. Then a fork in the trail that hadn't been there before. I pulled out my compass. It spun wildly, full circles like it was caught in a magnetic storm. I kept walking, but the deeper I went, the more the forest felt wrong. Trees twisted in strange angles, no underbrush, just bare earth and silence. And then I saw it, a figure, tall, broad, covered in dark, shaggy fur. At first, I thought it was a bear standing upright, but its arms were too long, its shoulders too wide, and when it turned, I saw its face, part human, part something else. Wide-set eyes, a flattened nose, no expression, just watching me. We locked eyes for maybe 5 seconds, then it melted back into the trees, without a sound. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. A trick of light, a weird moose, anything but what I'd actually seen. I turned around and ran back to the cabin. That night was worse. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside, heavy, slow, crunching across the gravel. Then came the sniffing, something breathing, right outside the cabin wall. Deep, raspy snorts, like it was taking in my scent. My skin crawled. I didn't dare look out the window. After 5 minutes, it went silent. I thought it was gone, until I heard something on the roof, thudding, pacing, like it was walking in circles, above me. I didn't sleep. The next day, I decided to stay inside and wait for daylight to hike out again. I kept the fire low, avoided the windows. Late afternoon, I found something near the firewood stack, a bundle of sticks tied together with long strands of hair, human looking, coarse, black. Underneath it, a half-chewed boot, the kind hunters wear, still had part of a foot inside it. I foamed at dusk. I tried the radio again, still static, but something strange happened. A voice came through. It was warped and scratchy, but I heard it clear as day. You should not be here. Then static again. That night, I heard the howls. They weren't wolf howls. They were deeper, slower, almost mournful, and they came from every direction, followed by drumming, low and rhythmic, like fists pounding tree trunks. And then, a knock on the cabin wall. Just one, but it was inside the wall, like it had come from between the boards. I packed my bag and left before sunrise, using only the stars to guide me. I didn't take the trail. I just ran in one direction, straight downhill, toward what I hoped was the old logging road. I fell twice, tore up my arms on thorns, but kept going. Eventually, I saw the truck. I didn't even stop to breathe. I got in, started it, and floored it down the trail. I didn't stop until I reached the gas station back near the highway. The attendant stared at me. "You all right?" he asked. I looked at myself in the mirror. I had scratches all over my face. My shirt was ripped. My eyes were wild. "I'm fine," I said. But I wasn't. It's been 2 years. I haven't told my cousin what happened. I never will. He still goes up there. Says it's quiet, peaceful. But I wonder sometimes, what if it let me go? Not because I escaped, but because it wanted me to carry a message. That it's still there, watching, waiting. And one day, it might not be so merciful. When I was young, maybe 17 or so, I learned that some parts of the forest aren't meant for people like us. I don't mean criminals or poachers. I mean ordinary people. People with families, jobs, and birthdays, who go into the woods thinking, it's just trees and dirt and deer trails. What happened to me in Dead Elk Valley taught me otherwise. It's not just trees out there. Back in high school, I was part of a youth hiking club in Northeast Oregon. We did weekend treks in small groups, led by an ex-park ranger named Carson. He was one of those guys who could survive off pine needles and squirrel fat if he had to, and he loved teaching us how to read animal tracks, purify creek water, or spot lightning, struck trees from miles off. One weekend, Carson picked a spot none of us had heard of before, Dead Elk Valley. Said it was an old tribal land that had been absorbed into national forest but wasn't on many public maps. According to him, it was quiet, untouched, and great for spotting elk herds. But when we got to the edge of the valley, something didn't feel right. It was colder than the trailhead, even though we hadn't changed elevation much. No wind, no bird calls, just absolute stillness, like the forest was holding its breath. Carson, usually talkative, got quiet too. He stared into the trees, like he was trying to remember something. "You all right?" I asked. He nodded slowly, but didn't answer. We kept walking. The hike in was long and steep. Our group was small, just me, Carson, a girl named Lacey, and her younger brother Kyle. We set up camp near a small creek where the valley opened up wide, surrounded by thick evergreens, gorgeous in a postcard way. But the forest around us, it felt wrong. The trees were bigger here, older, some had scars, huge vertical gouges, 5 or 6 feet off the ground, like something had clawed them decades ago. No sap, just smooth, healed, over bark, like old wounds. Lacey pointed them out. "Bear?" she asked. Carson didn't answer. That night, we heard the knocking. It started around 2 a.m., 3 sharp, deliberate knocks, like fists on wood, echoing through the trees. Then silence, then another set. Closer. Knock, knock, knock. Carson stepped outside the tent with his flashlight. I followed him. We stood there, scanning the trees. No wind, no animals. Just the sound of something waiting. "I want everyone packed by morning," Carson said suddenly. "We're leaving early." I'd never heard him sound scared before, but we didn't make it out that morning because Kyle was gone. His tent was still zipped up, but he wasn't inside. His sleeping bag was empty, still warm. His boots were missing. We called for him for 20 hours. Carson finally found his tracks leading away from camp, but not like he'd walked. They looked like he'd been dragged. Claw marks trailed beside the scuffed boot prints. We followed them for half a mile until they just stopped, like the forest had swallowed him whole. And that's when we heard it. A scream, high-pitched, animal-like. But it wasn't a cougar, and it wasn't a boy. It sounded wrong. Human, but not. Carson turned white. "We need to go, now." We didn't pack. We ran downhill, through trees that all looked the same, our boots slipping in moss and wet pine needles. Something moved in the trees beside us, big and fast. We caught glimpses through the branches. Dark hair, shoulders like boulders, long arms that didn't swing like a man's, and the smell, wet fur, rot, and something sour. At one point, Lacey tripped and hit her head. Carson picked her up and practically carried her. I don't know how he managed it at his age, but adrenaline makes people strong. That thing followed us for miles, and then it stopped. We didn't hear it anymore. No footsteps, no knocking, just stillness. When we made it to the ranger station near the old forest road, Carson reported it. They did a search, sent dogs, helicopters, the works they never found Kyle, but they did find his boots, placed neatly side by side at the base of a cedar tree, and next to them, deep in the dirt, were prints, huge, barefoot, with toes longer than fingers. They said it was a hoax, that Kyle must have run off, maybe got lost and fell in a ravine. But Carson knew better. He quit guiding after that, wouldn't even talk about it. As for me, I never went back to the forest. Dead Elk Valley is still out there, still unmarked on most maps, and if you find yourself near it, turn around, because the thing that lives there doesn't forget your scent, and it might be waiting for you, just like it waited for us. One night something happened which I cannot forget, even though every part of me wishes I could. It happened deep in the Klamath Mountains of Northern California, in a patch of dense, forgotten wilderness called Clover Break. That name doesn't show up on GPS, and most locals won't even admit it exists anymore. But I know what I saw there, what I felt, what followed me back. Back then, I was working as a wildlife tracker for a conservation program. It was mostly solo work, trail cameras, tagging points, habitat notes. I loved the solitude. I thought I'd found the one job on Earth where peace and silence was a perk. But silence can be deceptive. Sometimes, it means something else is listening. I'd been sent into Clover Break after multiple reports of displaced elk herds. Farmers on the edge of the forest kept saying the elk were stampeding down from the mountains in the middle of the night, crashing through fences like they were fleeing from something. The strange part, there was no sign of predators. No wolves, no mountain lions, just trampled brush, broken trees, and absolute chaos. I hiked in late August, set to camp for 6 days. Mapping migration paths and placing motion, triggered cameras. The first 3 days were calm, no movement, no scat, no howls in the night. Even the birds were sparse. On the 4th day I found something I still can't explain. It was a grove of cedar trees, at least 50 of them, each stripped of bark imperfect, even spirals from the base up to the branches, like something massive had twisted them by hand. The strangest part, the bark was piled neatly in a circle around a giant flat stone, as if it was arranged, not by wind, by intent. Right there, I should have turned back. But I was trained to observe, not panic, so I documented it, took photos, marked coordinates. Then, I kept going. That night, my tent started shaking. Not violently, just enough to wake me. At first I thought it was wind, but then I heard breathing, low, slow, heavy. I held my flashlight, turned it on, and unzipped the door. Nothing was there, but just outside the ring of light, I swear, I saw movement. Something large, stepping backward into the trees without making a sound. The ground was damp, no tracks, but something had dragged its hand across the tent wall. A smear of muddy residue, stretched from top to bottom, 5 streaks, human-shaped, but too wide, too long. The next day, I climbed to a high ridge to retrieve one of my trail cams. When I checked the footage, I froze. The first few hours showed nothing but deer, raccoons, the usual. Then, around 2:13 a.m., something moved past the lens. It was tall, too tall, broad, shouldered, but hunched. Its arms hung low, swinging unnaturally. Its head was large, conical, no visible eyes, just a dark void of a face. But the worst part wasn't what I saw, it was what I heard. As the figure moved past the camera, there was a sound, a low vibrating hum, like an engine idling in a cave. It went on for 30 seconds after the creature disappeared, making the camera's audio hiss and warp like a dying radio. I deleted the footage. I couldn't bear to watch it again. That night, I heard something talking. Not words, not speech, but low clicks, groans, a strange whistle, like air being forced through a clogged pipe. And it was right outside my tent. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. I just lay there, frozen, for hours. When I opened my eyes at dawn, the tent door was open. I never unzip it from the outside. There were pine cones placed in a perfect circle around my sleeping bag, and something had taken my boots. I ran, barefoot, bleeding. Didn't care. The only goal was out. Somewhere around midday, I made it back to the old trailhead where my pickup was parked. My truck was covered in dust and pine needles, but drawn into the passenger side window, traced through the grime, was a shape, a face, 2 deep, set eye holes, a wide slit of a mouth, and below it, claw marks. 5 of them, not deep dot, just enough to let me know I was seen. A few days later, after I reported my data and claimed equipment failure, someone mailed me a box. No return address, no note. Inside was a single boot, my boot, stuffed inside. It were photos, my trail cam images. Someone had gone back, someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. I never returned to Clover Break. I never will, but sometimes, when I sleep, I still hear the humming, like something is breathing right beneath the surface of the world, and it's waiting for me to come back. One night something happened, which I cannot forget. I had gone into the hills behind our family's old hunting cabin. Deep in a stretch of land near the Idaho-Montana border, folks call Widow's Hollow. It's the kind of place that doesn't show up on modern maps, and for good reason. There's nothing out there but old, growth pines, broken logging trails, and the bones of people who went missing trying to cross it. I wasn't there for any thrill. I was there to track something that had been slaughtering elk without eating them, something that left half-ton bulls gutted and stacked like wood near the creek, something that left behind giant, 2-toed tracks in the snow and a stench so foul it could knock a man down. And before you think this is just another old wilderness tale, let me say this: I saw it, I followed it, and I barely made it back. It started with a call from my cousin Kenny. He and I used to hunt Widow's Hollow every season growing up. We stopped after our Uncle Rick went missing out there in 2009. One minute he was tracking a deer, the next minute his radio went silent. We found his rifle and pack, neatly set down by the trail. Not a drop of blood, not a footprint, just gone. I hadn't gone back since. But Kenny called me in December last year, sounding half drunk and half scared, out of his mind. Something's been tearing through the herd, he said. Not wolves, not cats, big, quiet, and it walks upright. I laughed at first, but then he sent pictures. Deep footprints in the snow, some nearly 18 inches long, sunk 5 inches down, carcasses split open like someone used an axe. Rib cages peeled back like fruit. Worst of all was the way the heads were always missing. Clean. Gone, no blood trails. Just the body, lying still like it had been posed. So I packed up, took time off work, and drove out to the cabin. When I got there, I found Kenny pacing the porch, rifle slung low, eyes like saucers. He didn't look like the same guy. He said the sounds had started 3 nights before. Long whistles in the trees, always far off, but circling closer. Once, he said, it knocked on the window just before dawn. I asked if he was messing with me. He didn't smile, just nodded toward the shed out back. See for yourself. Inside the shed was what was left of a black bear. What got my attention wasn't that it was dead. It was how it had died. Its head was missing, again, and it had been placed, not dropped, like someone or something wanted to display it. There were no signs of a fight, no blood trail, just this giant creature folded up inside the shed like a toy. I almost left right then, but something in me needed to know, so I told Kenny we'd go out that night and track it. We didn't talk much as we moved through the dark. Kenny took the lead, his boots crunching through patches of old snow and dead leaves. I followed with my thermal scope, scanning the ridgeline dot at around midnight. We heard it, a long, low whistle. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't wind. It sounded intentional. Then, something moved at the edge of my vision. I raised the scope and scanned the tree line, and I saw it. It was at least 8 feet tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and hulking. But what made me gasp wasn't the size. It was the way it stood, completely still. Arms too long, legs slightly bowed, its head cocked at a weird angle, like it was listening. Then it moved, fast, not toward us, around us. It knew we were there, and it was circling. I whispered for Kenny to move, but he was frozen, just staring into the trees like he was hypnotized. That's when we heard the second whistle, closer, and the third, behind us. We ran. There's no shame in it. We bolted like scared kids, crashing through brush and roots and snow. But no matter how fast we ran, the sounds followed. Whistles, branches breaking. At one point, I swear, I saw something pacing us, just barely out of range of my light. Every time I turned, it stopped. Every time I looked forward, I felt it move again. It was like it wanted us to run, to tire out, to separate. We made it back to the cabin, locked the doors, and killed the lights. Kenny slumped against the wall, panting. I've heard it mimic my voice, he said suddenly. It called my name from the trees last night. Sounded like me. Exactly like me. That was when I truly started to believe we weren't dealing with any known creature. This was something older, smarter, and it wanted us to know it. The next morning, Kenny was gone. His boots were still by the door. His rifle, no tracks, no blood dot. Just the front door wide open, and on the porch, laid carefully where his boots had been, was a single deer antler, snapped in half. I searched for 3 days, called every ranger, deputy, and old hunter I knew. They never found a trace, but sometimes, on cold, silent nights, I still hear it, the whistle low, playful, mocking and sometimes I dream of what I saw through that thermal scope, not the face, because I never saw its face, just the eyes, too wide, too aware, and too human. If you'd asked me 5 years ago if I believed in cryptids, I would have laughed. I was a wildlife biologist with a master's degree and 6 years working with the U.S. Forest Service. My job was to collect data, analyze animal populations, and monitor ecological health. Science, measurable, repeatable, logical, was the backbone of my life. But after what happened at Timberline Pass, no amount of logic has ever helped me sleep again. My name is Daniel Rusk. I was stationed in Northern California during the 2020 wildland recovery season, after a series of devastating fires had swept through Laysan National Forest the year prior. The Forest Service had contracted several of us to monitor regrowth and wildlife migration. My assigned region was just north of Burnt Ridge, an isolated elevation where the trees had blackened but survived, and the land was slowly recovering. That place, it looked alive, but it wasn't. Not anymore. It started with the sounds. Timberline Pass had no human presence, no cell towers, no planes overhead, no nearby towns. At night, the silence was absolute, until at WASN. Single quotes around my third night alone at the base camp, I began hearing what sounded like a voice, not screaming, not yelling, just talking. Too far away to make out, but unmistakably human in cadence, pauses, rhythm, the shape of language. Sometimes high-pitched, sometimes low and guttural, sometimes overlapping. The first night, I figured it was wind or animals. By the fourth night, I started recording it, and what I played back chilled me to my marrow. It wasn't language, not in any traditional sense, but there were patterns, distinct vocalizations. One particular sequence repeated every 30 seconds for over 3 minutes. 6 short bursts of sound, followed by a long moaning tone. I sent the audio to a linguist friend at Stanford. His reply came within an hour. It's mimicry. Someone, or something, is imitating speech. But it doesn't understand how we speak, only that we speak. I tried brushing it off. Stress, isolation, maybe some kind of bird call. I'd never encountered, until the night I found the tooth. I was hiking to set up motion, triggered trail cameras to miles north of base camp, when I noticed a depression in the moss. Something had knelt there recently. Huge. I found an indentation the size of a dinner plate. Then I found what I thought was a chunk of ivory. It was a molar, human-shaped, but oversized, and old. The enamel was stained, the root frayed and cracked like dry wood. I bagged it and brought it back, hoping it was a bear's. But I knew better. Bear teeth don't look like ours, and they sure as hell aren't 4 inches long. The next night, I was awoken by the voice again. Only this time, it was just outside the tent. Dad. I froze. Dan, my name, clear as day. It didn't come from one mouth. It came from several, overlapping and distorted. Too deep, too wet, like trying to speak underwater with shredded vocal cords. I didn't move, and then came the smell. Rot, wet fur, dirt, and something far worse, blood and mold and age. The air felt thick enough to chew. I gripped the flare gun in my hand and waited. When I finally got the nerve to unzip the tent, there was nothing there, just footprints in the ash-covered soil. 5-toed, flat, no arch, each one nearly 20 inches long. I wanted to radio for pickup the next day, but the satellite unit was dead, not drained, fried. The wires inside had melted like someone had microwaved the battery pack. My GPS was cracked, my compass spun in circles, and all my motion. Triggered trail cameras had vanished. All but one, the last camera bolted into a charred pine tree, had been activated at 3:41 a.m. It captured 3 frames. Frame 1, the edge of the woods, stillness, normal. Frame 2, a figure, blurry in motion, entering from the left, massive, thick fur, no visible face. Frame 3, nothing but static and vertical lines. I left the next morning on foot, backpack half full, every hair on my neck screaming to run. I followed the ridgeline, trying to orient myself without any tools. But the trails had changed, or something had changed them. Fallen trees appeared where there had been none. Stumps blocked paths. Trees were stripped of bark, clawed, shredded, gored, not randomly, marked. I hiked in a loop for 3 days. No food, barely any water. I stopped seeing deer, birds, even insects. The forest was watching. I began hallucinating. At least I thought I was. I heard my mother's voice calling me. I saw a cabin that vanished when I approached. I heard a child sobbing in the ferns. None of it was real. But then again, what if it was? I finally collapsed near an old ranger tower that had been abandoned for decades. The roof had caved in. The wood was black with rot. I climbed it anyway. From the top, I saw something move below. Not just 1.3. They moved silently, despite their size, 8 to 9 feet tall, coated in dark hair, but with patches of skin exposed. And on those patches, scars, symbols, dot carvings. They didn't walk like apes. They moved like soldiers, like hunters. They didn't look for me. They knew where I was. One of them stopped beneath the tower, looked up, and then, without warning, it spoke. Dahan. The same distorted voice. The same wet consonants. Only now, it was smiling. Its teeth weren't right. Too human. Too many. That was the last thing I remember before I passed out from exhaustion. I was found by a search and rescue team 2 days later, half conscious, dehydrated, covered in scratches. My fingernails were gone, torn off. They said I'd been missing for 9 days. I never went back. I handed over my field logs. What remained of my gear, the tooth. None of it made it into the official report. I filed a missing equipment claim. The report was marked inconclusive, environmental incident. They paid me out and politely told me I was no longer needed. The recording's gone, the camera erased, the tooth lost in transit. But I still have the scratches. I still dream about the voices, and sometimes I wake to find the woods behind my house quieter than they should be, not silent, just waiting. They say confession is good for the soul. Maybe writing this down will stop the dreams. Maybe it'll stop the noise in my ears, that low rumble like something dragging a tree across stone. My name's Kenneth Rule. I spent 32 years working as a faller in the Idaho Panhandle National Forest. If you're not familiar, that means I cut down trees, big ones. Used to say I could drop a cedar straighter than a plumb line in Jesus Carpentry Shop. In 97, I was working a solo contract up on the north slope near Priest River. Hard, too. Access territory. Nobody wanted it. Too many stories. Too many missing tools. Missing men, even. But I had a divorce behind me and debt stacking like timber, so I took it. It started small. Things going missing. Not stolen, removed. I'd come back to the drop site and find my saw 200 yards away, teeth snapped like someone had twisted it by hand. Trees I hadn't marked would fall overnight, sometimes toward my gear. I thought it was sabotage from locals, or maybe just some drunk hunters screwing with me. Then came the stink, like rot and wet fur, and something long dead in the sun. It would drift in before sundown and hang low. You couldn't breathe through it without gagging. One night I vomited into my boots and just sat there shaking until morning. I started carrying. A sidearm slept with it. Hell, I started sleeping in the truck with the engine running. I kept the lights on too, until the battery died one night. And that's when I saw it. I'd been listening to a cassette, something to drown out the woods. The tape clicked off, and the silence hit like a slap. I looked out through the windshield and saw it standing between two pines. Huge, hair like moss and bark. Face half shadow, half human. But the eyes weren't animal. It stared at me. Not like prey, like a problem, like I was an issue it hadn't decided how to handle yet. I tried to start the truck. Nothing. Dead. I reached for the gun and dropped it between the seats. When I looked up again, it was closer. 20 feet maybe, still watching. I heard a sound like clicking, like bones snapping in a fist, and then it walked away. On 2 legs, quiet. I didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't finish the contract. I called in and left a voicemail. I'm done. Pay me for what I did, or don't. I'm done. That should be the end of it. But it's not. 3 years ago, I got a manila envelope. No return address. Inside was a Polaroid, a clear photo of me, sitting in the cab of that old truck, eyes wide, mouth open. Someone, or something, had taken it from the tree line, written on the back in blocky, childlike letters. Still deciding. I haven't worked a single day since. I still live in Idaho. I still hear dragging noises at night. I still leave out raw meat near the edge of the woods, because maybe, if it's fed, it'll stay deciding, and not act. Here's the next story in your Bigfoot horror anthology. When I was 24, Something happened to me that still makes it hard to sleep without a light on. I never believed in monsters before that year, at least. Not the kind you can hear breathing from just beyond the tree line when you're alone. I grew up in a small Oregon logging town, where forest legends are just background noise. Something to scare kids into staying out of the woods after dark. But what I saw wasn't a campfire story. It was real, and it followed me home. I had just gotten my degree in environmental sciences and landed a short-term mapping gig with a forestry group up near Dead Man's Ridge, a narrow forested stretch above Rogue River with miles of unexplored land and old-growth pine. My job was simple. Hike in, map the topography, mark tree clusters, and look for any signs of illegal logging. Dead Man's Ridge had a bad reputation, mostly among locals and old-timers. They said people used to go missing up there, hunters, surveyors, campers. But that was decades ago, and nothing official ever came of it. I brushed it off. Most people do, until they're the ones walking under those trees alone. The first few days of hiking were uneventful. Quiet. Too quiet. I mean that in the most literal way. No wind, no rustling, no birdsong. Just this overwhelming, pressure-filled silence that made my skin crawl like the forest was holding its breath. On the third day I found something strange. It was an old fire tower. Rusted. Abandoned. The stairs were half rotted, but I climbed anyway. Figured I could get a better GPS signal up there. That's when I saw the trees. About 200 yards away, a whole ring of pine trees had been snapped at the trunk. Not chopped, not fallen, snapped, 10 feet up. All at once the breaks looked fresh, the wood still pale and splintered, like something huge had stepped through them without effort. It gave me chills. I took a few photos, marked the spot, and climbed down. But I kept looking back. I didn't realize it at the time, but I'd already been seen. That night in my tent, I heard footsteps. Not the light crunch of deer or raccoons. No, these were heavy, deliberate, moving slowly through brush, then stopping, just past the edge of my headlamp's glow. I called out, "Hello?" Because that's what you're trained to do. No response, but the footsteps didn't run away. They retreated, like whatever it was didn't need to hurry. It knew it had time. The next day I went back to the broken trees to set a trail cam. The place felt wrong. The kind of wrong you feel in your teeth, like static. Before I left, I saw something on the ground that made me freeze. A footprint, not booted, not bare. It was massive, at least 15 inches long, sunken deep into the soil. Toes, arch, heel, but only one, like it had stepped once, then vanished. I took a photo, but it came out blurry, like something warped the lens right at that moment. I still have that picture. Every time I look at it, my stomach turns. That night, the footsteps came back. Closer this time, and something brushed against the tent. I packed up the next morning and started heading back toward the trailhead. I told myself it was just wildlife, a bear, an elk. But the truth was, I didn't want to be there anymore. About 3 miles from the main road, I stopped to take a break, and that's when I noticed it. Tree markings, scratches, not random, not from claws or antlers. These were lines, symbols, roughly carved into bark, forming crude, triangular patterns. They stretched for nearly half a mile, spaced evenly along the trees, like boundary markers, or warnings. I didn't take photos, I just walked faster. When I reached the truck, I thought I was in the clear, until I saw what was sitting on the hood. Pine cones, 5 of them, stacked into a perfect pyramid. I hadn't seen another human in days. No fresh tire tracks, nothing. And the pine cones, they were wet, like they'd just been pulled from deep in the woods. I knocked them off, jumped in, and left without looking back. But I should have, because that night, back home, it started again, tapping on the window, scratching on the roof, the smell of pine, sap thick and sweet and rotting. I thought maybe I was just paranoid, until I went outside the next morning and saw the dirt around my house. Footprints huge, deep, leading in a full circle around my house. Once, then gone. Over the next week, things escalated. Dead birds on my porch. Rocks thrown at the back of the house during the night. My dog refused to go outside. He just sat, trembling, staring at the back door with his ears pinned flat. And then, the whispering started. Not words, not language, just breathy, low muttering. Like someone imitating human speech without knowing how it worked. Eventually, I reached out to a tribal elder I knew through my environmental work. Someone who'd grown up near the old Klamath boundary. I didn't even finish explaining before he told me to stop talking. He said, if you brought something back from Dead Man's Ridge, it's not a spirit, it's not a ghost. It's a watcher. You don't see it. It sees you, and it won't leave unless it chooses to. Then he hung up. I don't know what followed me home. I moved. I burned everything I'd brought back from the woods, but sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still hear it just beyond the trees, watching, waiting, marking the edge of wherever I try to start again.